Hello, friends of philosophy. Let's talk about what inferentialism is, an important concept in recent philosophy. And this is an interesting article from Julian Merzi and Florian Steinberger. So let's just read the abstract. This article offers an overview of inferential role semantics. What that is, we will clarify that in a second. We aim to provide a map of the terrain as well as challenging some of the inferentialist standards and commitments. We begin by introducing inferentialism and placing it into the wider context of contemporary philosophy of language. Paragraph 2 focuses on what is standardly considered both the most important test case for and most natural application of inferential roles. Okay, let's skip that a little bit and let's come right at the beginning. There are two prima facie opposing tendencies in philosophical work concerning linguistic meaning and mental content: referential approaches and use-theoretic approaches. So we could also say maybe that it is an opposition of pragmatic use theories and semantic theories. And what does that mean? The one says that I have meaning by having a formal way of how I connect words in my head, and then I have ways of references how I attach these words to objects. And these broader theoretic use approaches, they say that the meaning of a word is not the way it is attached to an object in mind external reality, but it is more about the use. Wittgenstein is a very good example for that. Yeah, and here we have Wittgenstein, and he famously said, for a large class of cases, though not for all, and we should keep that in mind, in which we employ the word meaning, it can be explained thus: the meaning of a word is its use in language. Okay, so when I have a word like brick, we might say, oh, it's applied to the brick on a sidewalk or in a house. No, its meaning is the way we use it in our language. Give me the brick, bring the brick over there, be careful, wear a helmet in case a brick falls on your head, something like that. So it's a different understanding of meaning. And yeah, here we have an explanation then. According to the referential approaches, the semantic properties of linguistic expressions and concepts are primarily explained in terms of the broadly referential relations they bear to typically extra-linguistic objects. That's the referential approach. Object sets thereof, instantiation of properties, etc. In the case of language, referential relations are understood in terms of mappings from linguistic expressions to the corresponding semantic values in accordance with their semantic types. So what are semantic types? We have proper names that are mapped onto appropriate objects. I guess proper names is something like Socrates, which just applies to Socrates. Or if you give your dog a name, or if you give your car a name, it's only attached to that object, right? Then simple predicates might be associated with properties they designate. So I guess predicate would be being a man or something, and it would be applied to the category of man. Our use of linguistic expressions is then explained in terms of these referential semantic properties. We use the expressions of our language as we do because of their referential properties. So this is the referential approach. So the referential approach should be clear. Now what we do is we reverse the order of explanation. Okay, and now regularities are the central aspect of this theory, the regularities in applying language. It is these regularities and rules that are accorded explanatory primacy in accounting for meaning and conceptual content, and customary semantic notions such as reference, truth, and satisfaction are explained as a byproduct of them. So reference is only a result of, let's say, an inferential theory. Thus, linguistic practice precedes and shapes semantic theory rather than the other way around. So it's about the practice. Inferentialism is also about practice. So yeah, and now we get to inferentialism, which is a specific case of these use theories. So use theories of meaning of this sort are commonly known as inferential role semantics, or inferentialism for short. Inferential role semantics is a species of conceptual role semantics. On a broad understanding of it, conceptual role semantics includes any theory that holds that the content of mental states or symbols is determined by any part of their role or use in thought. So Wittgenstein could be seen as a conceptual role semantics, okay? But inferential role semantics restricts the semantically relevant features of an expression's conceptual role to the regularities or proprieties of inference. And let's find an example for this. Okay, unfortunately these papers, they are not usually thrown around with examples to explain these issues. That would be certainly helpful. But let's see this example here from logical inferentialism. So the idea is that we can explain the logical operator of AND by using inferences. That means two premises and a conclusion in a sense. And so we have, so in order to understand what AND means, we can just operate by using premises and conclusions. So here we have the introduction of saying, hey, you have A, you have B, and there's no AND yet in there. And then you say, from that follows A and B. And then we also have so-called elimination rules, where I say, hey, you have A and B, so you can conclude A. Or you have A and B, so you can conclude B. So this sounds very simple, right? And there's really not much magic to it. It's just that it seems you can understand the operator AND by only applying the model of inferences. So what you conclude. I guess we can, with a more material notion, and that's not logical, but we can conclude something like, hey, you have a tiger. Or, actually, I don't have a good example. Let me think of an example. Yeah, so this is maybe a bit of a stupid example, but you say, hey, you see the sun, and it's daylight. So you can say these two phenomena go together, sun and daylight, right? If you see the sun, then it's day. If it's day, there should be a sun somewhere. I think this is the best example that I could come up with that spontaneously. But let's get back to the text. Okay, so how do they plan to explain inferential role semantics? They want to contrast it immediately with accounts that are incompatible with it. So they say IRS is at odds with any account that takes expression of language or concepts to come as it were pre-equipped with meanings or contents. So if we take a language and its expressions to have already meaning that link it to the world, then we have a referential approach, I would say, right? And they call that informal semantics, and they maintain that semantics concepts are to be explained in terms of certain law-like correlations linking external things or property instantiations to tokenings of corresponding linguistic items or mental items. So yeah, that's basically what we do, right? We say, oh, I have a square, I call that square. I have red, I call it red. And so we have a mapping of an expression to a specific meaning. And the meaning itself is probably established in an inferentialist way. And that's maybe the hard thing to grasp, because without language, in this sense, we wouldn't have then meanings. However, it is a question, what do we mean by language, right? Language on a very broad level that involves conceptual activity. So, and then they go on, establishing direct language word mappings. Once the reference and designation relations are established by way the said reliable correlations between linguistic or mental items and their external causal antecedents, the usual semantic concepts are simply explained from the bottom up, right? So we explain reference, truth, and satisfaction with regard to the standard linkage between world and mind. In a second step, the theory then specifies compositional rules for determining the semantic values of more complex expressions as a function of their semantically relevant component parts. This atomistic mode of explanatory is more congenial to certain types of expressions than others. Okay, we don't have to go further into that. That's just the contrasting theory. So the paradigm case for these referential approaches are the questions of proper names that really apply to concrete objects, and predicates that apply to larger groups of objects. And the paradigm case for inferential role semantics are then logical expressions like and, or, and if, and that is because they don't just have reference, right? And they say, well, what are these then? So rather, the inferentialist will maintain the meanings of logical expressions are determined first and foremost by their inferential properties, which are encapsulated in the rules governing paradigmatic inferences involving them. IRS takes the bulk of the explanatory work to be done by intralinguistic relations, and that is opposed to direct language mappings, so that we don't have a bottom-up approach, which reference approaches do, but we have here indeed a top-down approach. Okay, and now we come to a more different part of the theory. So the inferentialist mode of semantic explanation might be thought to apply locally. So we have the distinction between local theories that mostly involve logical questions, moral questions, language such as logical, moral, causal, deontic, epistemic, or theoretical terms. So we maybe restrict inferentialism to a certain branch, and the one that I know in the most restricted sense is logical inferentialism. But then we have, on the contrary, also global inferentialism, and that applies it to the whole, that applies inferentialism to the whole of language. And the further interesting aspect is now that it seems we have to include language entry and language exit rules. So in case we want to deal with new objects from our experience, how do we actually expand the scope of our inferential inventory that we already established in our language? And here they write, that is, uses of expressions like observational predicates will have to be linked to perceptual cues on the entry side, and they must link up with intentional action on the exit side. Now, I really don't know what is intentional action here. Let me double check that. Okay, I really tried to understand that. I think what it is that when I have a new word and I want to integrate it into my linguistic horizon, I have to go through a cycle of perception, action, perception. So I have an example for this. Let me pull that out. So yeah, I just pulled out here text that I'm writing on Brandon. And he also says, in order to demonstrate that the way the world is constrains proprieties of inferential doxastic and practical commitment in a straightforward way from within those practices. Okay, this is a half sentence. I have to work on that again. But he comes up with an example to express the problem of how we have a grasp on the world. And he says, so we have a sour tasting liquid, for example, and that can be perceived as acidic, and thus it should turn litmus paper red. And now we test it, and it does not turn litmus paper red, and then we have to somehow acknowledge our practical failure. So we have like an inferential rule that is an exit rule, but it does not apply here. And then we somehow have to change our conceptual frame. And there I write through the cycle of perception, inference, action, and perception, we incorporate elements of the causal order. So this is what Brandom thinks on the matter. So it seems in case of the entry rules here, we always observe that litmus paper tastes sour and turns the paper blue, right? I don't know actually the theory. And now we observe an incompatibility, a contradiction, that it tastes sour and turns it red. So now I think we have to revise our conceptual scheme because the exit rules don't work anymore. So, or something went somewhere wrong with regard to the introduction of semantic concepts and the application of semantic concepts. I think that is what is the idea here. And so if we look at this text, in the absence of any such anchoring of meaning in our experience and interaction with the world, our inferential language game threatens to fail to latch onto the world. It could not serve as a means for representing the world. So do we really want to represent the world? I thought that's what inferential role semantics are against it. I think it could not account for practical failure. It could not count as a really pragmatic theory, I believe. Okay, so far so good. That was a basic introduction to inferentialism. There are further aspects that we have to discuss. For example, how it is related to holism, because the introduction of one inferential term presupposes the existence of other inferential terms already. So there's rather a whole of a language than just the mapping of one expression to an extralinguistic object. In a sense, we could say sentences preceded the existence of the simple components of sentences. Sentences precede words. Yeah, I hope that was kind of interesting. I had some problems still really understanding Brandom's litmus example and the idea of language entry and exit conditions. So if you have anything to comment on that, please let me know in the comments and correct my understanding of this here. It would definitely help me and maybe also help others. Otherwise, I will do more of these philosophical readings that I hope are helpful in a certain way. If so, then please subscribe to the channel. If not, then I just wish you a good life. Maybe we see again. You always see twice in life. Otherwise, live long, draw more inferences, and prosper. Bye-bye.